Hey everybody, good morning. Day 113 of spiritual healthcare. Welcome. Welcome. This is going to be a really interesting class this morning, and I'm excited to get in with it because I think it's going to end up to be kind of a series of classes. And I'm really looking forward to it. So welcome, everybody. It is good to see all of you this morning, day 113. This is going to be really, really good. We're going to be talking about negative entities and our kids' relationships with them, as well as our relationships as adults with them. And the role that they end up playing. So I'm really excited about today's show. This is going to be really good, and I think there's a lot to delve into here, especially with the one specific type of negative entity that I've noticed over the years. So there's going to be lots of really good conversation, and it's going to make us all dig a little bit deeper, I think. So good morning, Sally and Dan and everybody. It's nice to see everyone. I hope you guys had a really great Wednesday, and I went through the entire Wednesday yesterday thinking it was Thursday. It was really weird. It was really just weird. So good morning, you guys. I hope you guys are having an awesome day. And as I say, we're going to be delving into we've talked about negative entities on many different levels, but we have not talked about it on this plane before in the association and the relationship that we have with them, and how that our kids have with them, and where it comes from. If any of you guys have had kids who have had what I call interactions with a type of entity that I've nicknamed the wolf in sheep's clothing, you're gonna know that pulling a kid out of that bond and that relationship is really, really, really difficult, and it bleeds into the realm of adulthood as well. So we're going to talk about that, what it is that this looks like. So good morning to Cass. Nice to see you. We missed you too. It's good to see everyone. And I think today is gonna let us really sink our teeth into some new questions. And so many people, I think, can relate to this subject, not only with predatory entities and things like that, but also with predatory people as well, and why we hang on to people that are toxic. Why do we do that? So there's lots to cover this morning. I'm so looking forward to it. I hope you guys had a great day yesterday. It is really hot here today. We are now in the heat wave that everybody else had, that Texas had and southern states had. We now have your heat wave, so it's our turn. We're going to be in for it, I think, for a few days. It's been quite hot here. We haven't gotten as hot as what you guys were at, though. This would probably be cooler for you guys. But yeah, I wanted to dig into this today because I was reading some cases and things like that online, and I get people messaging me, talking about their kids having interactions with paranormal activity that is frightening them, and oftentimes the wolf in sheep's clothing entity personality is put on. I'll go into this a little bit so you guys know what I'm talking about. So when Stephanie and I first started Entity Seeker, when we were getting calls about people asking about hauntings that were scary stuff, and things that were frightening for people, negative stuff going on in the home, because rarely do people call when they're having a good time. Usually they're having a terrible time and they're trying to figure out how to make it stop. And, they would often ask us, what is this? We don't know what it is. This doesn't seem human. This is something that's, it's creating bite marks and scratches, and it growls, and it's huffing and grunting and whatever. And we realized really quickly that we were dealing with energies that weren't people, that this was something completely different. And, everybody, of course, all the different cultures have names for them, whether it be jinn or, demons or, whatever. Everybody's got a different name for it, but we don't know what they are. I mean, that's the reality of it. We don't know what they are. There's a really interesting paper by the CIA, that was released in 2003, and they did some research into it, some pretty hardcore research called the Gateway Project. And they came to the same conclusion that Stephanie and I did, which is that these are thought forms. These are our consciousness that has been born into reality through focused thought, which was pretty cool. So we've really felt like that is the answer to a lot of what these negative hauntings are. And what we noticed was that there were behavior patterns to identify within each haunting. And once you could identify the behavior pattern, you could start to identify what was going on in the house and where the haunting was headed, so you could deal with it. And one of the behavior patterns that became apparent very quickly, which I've dealt with numerous times, we nicknamed the wolf in sheep's clothing, because the wolf in sheep's clothing was always something that presented as something else. They presented as something else, but always was not. It was just not the identity that you ever saw. It just wasn't. It was always something that was, it had malicious intentions. Was not. It was not being honest about its presence. It was trying to pull images and things and ideas from the environment in order to create an identity. There was a very famous photo from the Amityville case. Very famous photo of a little boy who was apparently one of the. Excuse me. I was going to sneeze and I didn't. It was apparently one of the Lutz children, or the DeFeo children, I think. And it's blatantly not, because it's this little boy. He's leaning into a photograph on the stairwell, and his eyes are missing. His eyes are missing. So we noticed that oftentimes the images that these entities would present would be slightly off somehow. Had a client recently out in the prairies here that has 3 dogs, and the dogs are always getting attention and things like that. And so the entity manifests every once in a while as one of the dogs. So they have this 4th dog running around the house, and so this, but the dog looks weird. Like, it doesn't look like normal. It looks really, really weird. Apparently, it's very creepy. I've not seen it yet. But it's very, very creepy. So anyway, so these entities end up bluffing basically as these different identities, and it's to create a sense of security. It's to create a niche for itself in an environment, and sometimes it's done out of just manipulation and control. And we talked yesterday about why people lie. Like, why do people lie? And, entities sometimes aren't too much different when it comes to negative entities, but oftentimes it's to create a niche for itself within a home. So the problem with this is, and what I wanted to examine today, because we've kind of covered that in past classes, and what I wanted to examine today is the roles that an entity like this ends up filling when it gets involved in our life on an emotional level. And I think there is so much to dig into with this. And I think, as I say, this is probably going to last till this class is probably going to go into tomorrow as well. And the relationship that often can develop between these entities and children, because a lot of people will come forward and tell you straight up, my kid has got this imaginary friend and it's not good, and the imaginary friend is telling my child that it's going to kill me, and all sorts of crazy things. I've dealt with a number of cases like that as well, and it's really frightening. But here's the thing: the kids hang on to these entities with their life. And that's usually one of the parents' main concerns, is why is my kid addicted to spending time with this thing that is being cruel? It's, it flips back and forth. It's almost got narcissistic tendencies where 1 minute it's giving you good behavior and the next minute it's telling you you're horrible, and, it's threatening, and it's doing all of these things. Why is my kid hanging on to this so much? And so I wanted to start by talking about what I've observed, at least with girls in relation to this. And we'll do boys on another occasion, but I wanted to start with the girls' relationships with these things. And what I've noticed because I find there's a different reason for the boys to continue a relationship with these entities and the women and the girls to do it. And it bleeds into adulthood as well. So what I've noticed is that often the standards in which are set by fathers are often missing with these little girls that end up in these predatory relationships. And sometimes it's a predatory relationship. Maybe it's a living person. It could be a living person. But I see this with the wolf in sheep's clothing personality as well, where they are missing connection oftentimes with an adult in their experience. They're just missing a connection. And oftentimes it's if you've got an entity that's presenting as a male, like male child or male figure or something like that, there is a reason that image, that connection has hooked the child into moving forward with a relationship with something that is not good for them. And oftentimes, as I say, it's because there was no standard set at the beginning where they have somebody to look to say, this doesn't feel right, this isn't right. There is, especially when you've got, and then this happens often, I've noticed with these cases, is that often the male figure, whether like a father, whoever's looking after the child, oftentimes is missing from their experience altogether. They're just missing. And missing can fall into a number of different categories. It can fall into the category of, maybe the father is like there, but like completely emotionally checked out. Or they are, they're gone all the time. Or maybe they've passed away. Maybe they're dead. Maybe, there's been a divorce, or there's something has gone on where the male figure is not present for whatever reason. And what people, I think, miss out on, and if anybody out there that's watching this has had this experience of, as what a Yanla would call the daddyless daughter, the sense of unworthiness and being unloved and being unattractive and being unimportant, all of those things end up culminating with a lot of these little kids, a lot of these little girls. And it starts very early on. When they don't have that male figure coming in. So what can happen is that when you've got something that is moving into their world that is kind of magical, because let's be real, I mean, it's kind of cool, right, to have your secret imaginary friend, and knows enough and is aware enough to present in a certain way, you end up with kind of a recipe for disaster. And, and as I say, it doesn't always end up manifesting as an entity. Sometimes it's manifesting as a person. Like sometimes maybe this is a living person in their experience that's just not healthy for them. But those holes, those holes, because each one of those is a hole, the unworthy hole, the unloved hole, the unimportant hole, those holes that they get lived to. Okay, we live to the labels that we give ourselves. And when we don't have that standard that's there, and you've got an entity that's coming in, it's basically, it says all the right things, and it makes that bond or makes that connection with that child, it is really, really, really hard to turn around and explain to a young kid that this thing does not have their best interests at heart. It's really difficult to do that, because if they don't have something to compare that to, they end up hearing that you are now trying to take the only figure in their experience away from them that is filling one of those holes. Like, this becomes a big problem. So this is a big issue. So often these relationships with the wolf in sheep's clothing end up giving a sense of external validation. And we've talked about this in past classes where that external validation has become so important to so many people, where we're getting crowd esteem and not our own self-esteem. And that often will happen with these situations where these kids are missing that sense of validation from an older figure. And now all of a sudden they've got this entity that is available all the time. It's got nothing else to do. It's there. It's present. It's interactive. It's interested. It wants to build a relationship. It's acting on that to weasel itself in. And as I say, and this applies to predators as well. So don't think this just applies to, crazy, spiritual stuff, but this can apply to other things as well. And the kids will do whatever they can to keep the entity or the relationship, no matter what. No matter what. Doesn't matter what you do. It builds a bond there that is really, really, really hard to break apart. Kaz is saying it almost becomes addictive. Yeah, it absolutely does, because the hole that they're experiencing in themselves is not getting filled up. It's not getting filled up. So the addiction is coming from trying to fill that hole up with this external validation, and it's these temporary fixes that they get, and it's easier to overlook the bad behavior of the entity when there is no standard to meet. So if the entity is turning around, and often, like I've had cases where it's turned around and point blank threatened the family, told the family that, it's going to kill them, or, it goes right off and kills a pet. And the Pickman household, it killed their cat. Horrible behavior out of these things. But when they start to live for the good stuff, when they start to live for those little pieces of good behavior, it becomes a really difficult thing to break, because they start to nurture and cling on to all of those good moments. It's interesting, in the psychology terms, it's actually called breadcrumbing. There's a term for it. And breadcrumbing is literally getting these little drops of affirmations, and those periods, and you see this with a haunting often like this, is those periods of time get shorter and shorter and shorter, where those good things are happening and the good interactions are happening, and then lo and behold, all of a sudden you've got these long stretches of, these entities setting fires and harassing and scratching and biting and doing all these things. And but every once in a while it'll do something, incredible. There was and I can't remember which case it was anymore, but I remember reading about one that would actually manifest things like fruit baskets. It would actually give gifts to the family, where they would wake up in the morning and there would be like a fruit basket on their table or something crazy like that. But it's like getting the flowers after the abuse, and it's a really difficult thing to break. But understanding that longing that a lot of these daughters will have for some sort of adult or male figure, especially the male figures, seriously, it ends up becoming such an ache that they have to fill it. They will find a way to fill it. And you want to be the reason that they fill that gap. You want to be the reason, because something else will, hands down, something else will. And oftentimes these young girls end up kind of fantasizing about what their life, and adults do it too. Adult women do it too. Fantasize who they wish their father was, or who they wish that person was, and what it would have been like had that person been there. And it gets played on. This gets played on by these predatory intelligences, whether it be living or not. And we really have to be aware, of those stories. What is, and here's the big question, if you've got a kid in this situation, you have to start to ask yourself, what is it that you, because sometimes it's you or your child, is trying to experience through this intelligence? What is it that your child is trying to experience through this intelligence? And the answer to that question is going to start to fill gaps in your own head. And as I say, if it's you, maybe it is a question that you have to answer for yourself. But we have to understand that there's a root here about how we end up wanting to play out certain things in our world, whether that is healthy or not. And we often, in effort to replay the past, we end up going looking for something, whatever that is, and it comes out in all different ways. And some people, it actually comes out in literal addiction. It comes out in substance abuse and alcohol and all sorts of things like that. Sometimes it comes out in that way. but they end up getting stuck. And this goes for older girls and into adulthood, stuck in what they should or could have had, or think they could have had, or think he would have been. And when they start to get those little bits and pieces from an entity like the wolf in sheep's clothing, they end up becoming highly addicted to getting that validation through that means. And it can become just really, really, really toxic. We have to get the fact that this ultimately is violence of the self. It really is. We think of violence of the self in all sorts of ways. We think of it as like, cutting or going out and getting drunk and crashing our car or something like that. We think of it in those terms, but we've got to get that when we think about violence towards who we are, it can come in the mode of just not having enough awareness or integrity to hold ourselves to that new standard. We have a choice to pick between the story of the child that we have going on, because it's the story of the child that we have going on that allows us to get into a situation with something like the wolf in sheep's clothing, where we're getting that payoff from it, and the adult story. And when we become adults, when we come out of this, and we grow up, then the story that we choose to follow becomes a choice. It becomes a choice. We can either let the little kid that's all, broken and needing a father or whatever to drive the car. Not a good idea. Never a good idea to let little kids drive cars. Or we could put the kid in the back seat and start to drive the car ourselves. So we do get to have this choice. But understanding who is driving the car begins to help you break down the story and break down why a haunting with a wolf in sheep's clothing oftentimes is happening. What is it filling? What is it filling the gap? For those of you guys who have seen my episode of A Haunting, which was back in 2006 or something like that. That was a long time ago now. But I was on the season 4 of A Haunting. It was like episode 12. Or whatever, and the story for me was one of those situations where my roommate at the time had there was an entity that was existing in our apartment where it was just presenting itself as this young child, and because he was missing his parents and he was missing his kids in another province, because he was a parent, that played into a need for him that was really, really, really important. So this is a great example of wolf in sheep's clothing. The entity wanted nothing to do with me because it knew I knew better. It knew I saw it. And so we've got to understand that even as, whether it be as adults or as kids, we often ask, well, why is this happening? Why is this entity doing what it's doing? But we are intrinsically, by not healing this stuff about not having that figure there, that father figure there, we are asking for something from the universe that is now being responded to, except you're asking from a place of lack. You're asking from this place of disconnection because it's unhealed, and you end up getting back exactly where you are. And if you're in that place of lack and in that place of disconnection or upset or anything like that, the reflection back becomes pretty ugly. But it will, these, whether it be a person, whether it be an entity, whatever it is, will fill that space. One will see it and fill the space. And they really do see those broken pieces, toxic people or negative entities, as as a stepping stone, an opportunity. They see it as an opportunity to basically invade our experience. They really do. And we can never, ever, as much as it's easy to point a finger at them, we can't underestimate our own ego for allowing us and for making us continue to choose to participate in that experience. Because make no mistake, we get to choose. We really do get to choose. So the big question becomes this: what is the story that you or your child, whichever is going on, is telling themselves that has attracted this or keeps it there? what is the story? Because when you can figure out what the story is, suddenly you're going to come to some new conclusions about what it is that is rooting this experience and keeping it active and present. And I guarantee you with Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, it is the intelligence, the entity, whatever it is in your world, is responding to a whole somewhere. It just is. There's something it's responding. And as I say, Kaz is totally right. It is like an addiction. The story we tell ourselves is supporting you staying in the pain. And when we start to change the story, we start to understand what it is that is allowing us to keep this relationship, then we can start to understand what it is that's attracting these things. And usually, here's the thing too, usually negative entities, especially with the Wolf in Sheep's Clothing personality type, is not an isolated incident. It's not isolated. And if you start to look at the other relationships in your life, or the other relationships in your child's life, usually with kids, the kids that end up sort of getting picked by entities like this are isolated, they're quiet, they're the kids that don't have a lot of friends, they're feeling alone, they're going through trauma, all of these different things. There's reasons. And there's something going on, and there's somebody usually not plugged in enough that they're either missing what the child's feeling or going through, it's not getting addressed, or they're not plugged in. And it's consistent through a lot of these cases. So what's the answer to this? What do we do about it? Some of it is really letting go basically letting go of the againstness of what it is. We already know we don't want it in our experience. We already know that. But we have to be able to turn around and define what it is that new relationship is going to look like. If that was filled in a healthy way, what would that look like? What would it look like? What can we do different? And to be able, especially with kids, to partner with them and not be down their backs telling them that they cannot interact with whatever this thing is, as hard as it is. Because as soon as you try to get in there and start to form a wedge, they start to see it as you forming a wedge between something that they have craved and the attention that they have craved and the responses that they have craved. They see that as an act of war. Hands down, it's an act of war. And you will become the opposition instantaneously. So it's about being able to take a step back and realize that it's setting the new standard. People that love you don't threaten you. They don't threaten your family. They don't, they don't make you feel sad or, hurt you in some way on purpose. And when we could start to model and understand that, this is something that these kids are watching, and they're looking for somebody to come in. They're looking for an adult to come in and go, no, you don't get to treat my kid this way. You don't get to, oh hell no, you can't behave like this. The kid starts to look at the adult, telling this entity off and going, man, like they've really got a handle on this stuff. They really get it, and they're really out for my best interest and my well-being. But coming after the kid, it's never a good idea. So there's lots to talk about, as I say, on this subject matter. And we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, especially with boys who have this, and the difference between boys dealing with negative entities in Wolf in Sheep's Clothing versus girls, because it's very different dynamic. And but it's important to understand the differences so you know what it is these people are, what these negative entities are looking for, as well as just predators in our world. Like there's people out there that are awful, and and when you've got a kid that is looking to fill that gap, somehow someone is gonna fill the gap. It may as well be themselves finding themselves and your voice in their ear, because you don't want something else's voice in their ear filling that gap for you. You want to be able to plug in. So that being said, we got to do some affirmations before we go. So everybody take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. And at this moment, all is well. I'm able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance of the life around me. I'm able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. Everybody take a breath. Thank you guys for a awesome spiritual healthcare on this wonderful Thursday morning. I hope you guys have a great day today, and we're going to continue this conversation tomorrow. If you guys know of anyone who needs to hear this stuff, needs to hear this conversation, bring them with you to spiritual healthcare in the morning, because I think these subjects are so important to talk about, and understanding where this stuff comes from, because we can talk about cases until the end of the earth, but until we understand the roots of where it comes from, then we miss the opportunities to really learn about what's going on, because it applies to everything. It applies to all that we do. So I will see you guys tomorrow morning. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.